Hi everyone, Mr. Johnson here. As we've seen in chemistry class, there are three major ways to represent the world around us. We can use words, particle diagrams, or numbers. Today we're going to focus on the numbers and the math associated with them. It can be challenging to remember whether to multiply or divide numbers in certain circumstances. Luckily, we don't have to remember. I'm going to show you two ways that we can convert numbers and solve some chemistry problems, and this will be helpful in chemistry and even beyond into physics. Either of these methods is acceptable, and you should choose one that makes the most sense to you and the one that makes you feel the most comfortable. Let's imagine that we have a problem such as this, where we want to find a volume of iron that will balance on a two-pan balance with 10 milliliters of aluminum. So we can imagine, so we have on one side, we have aluminum, and it's 10 milliliters. Okay, so now we need to decide if it's going to balance with iron, how many milliliters is that going to take? Okay, so we know in order for them to balance that they have to have the same mass. So it's best to start out with a plan with either method. So we'll start off, so we have 10 milliliters of aluminum. I'm going to abbreviate it here. Okay, and we want to end up with some number of milliliters of iron. So to figure that out, first step is, well, we know that the aluminum and iron have to weigh the same amount. So we can convert volume of aluminum to the grams of aluminum. And we know that however many grams of aluminum, it's going to be the same number of grams of iron. And we can take grams of iron and we can convert it into a volume. And the way that we're going to do that is by using the densities that we have. And we know that, so we know the density of aluminum and we know the density of iron. So we'll need both those numbers. So the first method to solve this is called, is just going to be setting up a proportion. So step one, we know since we're starting with aluminum, we know that, and again because of the density, we know that there's 27.0 grams in every 1 milliliter of aluminum. And the density of aluminum never changes. So we can set up a proportion. These have to be the same because the densities don't vary. And we know that we have exactly 10 milliliters. We just don't know how many grams that is. So what we can do is we can cross multiply. So x times 1 is x. And we know that 2.7 times 10 is equal to 27. And we end up with, since we're solving for grams, our unit should be in grams. And that is of aluminum. Okay? We also know, as we said before, if we want this to balance, if we have 27 grams of aluminum, that has to equal the same mass as the iron. So 27 grams of iron. It won't balance otherwise. So our final step is now we need to get from 27 grams of iron to volume. So we know for iron, the density is 7.87 for every 1 milliliter. Okay. And the density never changes for iron. And we know we have 27 grams of iron from the beginning. We just need to figure out how many milliliters that is. So we cross multiply again. So 27 times 1 is 27, which is equal to 787 times x. And then what we need to do is we're going to divide both sides by 787, as you would in math class. So that's going to cancel. 27 divided by 787 comes out to be 3.4307 milliliters of iron. Okay, and if we remember that if the most number of sig figs that we had was 10 milliliters to start with, exactly 2 sig figs, we should round our final answer to 2 sig figs. So our final answer, rounded to these 2 digits, is just going to be 3.4 milliliters of iron. So, just to summarize, we set up a proportion to go from volume of aluminum to grams. We knew the grams had to be equal, and then we went from grams of iron to milliliters of iron. The second method is called factor label, and we're going to take a look at that now. So, using the same exact plan as before, what we're going to do is we're going to start with 10 milliliters of aluminum. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a little grid here. So we know that we can convert milliliters of aluminum into grams of aluminum by using the density. So we know aluminum is 2.70 grams for every 1 milliliter, and we know that because we get that right off of our chart here. So that converts us into grams. We know that the amount of aluminum and the amount of iron have to be equal. So if we could really use any ratio here, so we know that for every 1 gram of aluminum, it's going to balance with 1 gram of iron. Okay, they have the balance, it has to be same amounts. Okay. And then what we want to do is we want to convert from grams of iron to the volume of iron. We know that there are 7.87 grams of iron in every 1 milliliter of iron. Okay, which gets us to our final answer. Now, all we're going to do is we're just going to multiply entirely across the top, and then we're going to divide by each of the bottom numbers that we have. So the nice thing about that is that by doing so, any units that we find on both the top and the bottom are going to cancel out. So milliliters of aluminum drops out, grams of aluminum drop out, grams of iron drop out, and our final answer is going to be in milliliters of iron. Okay, so as we multiply across the top, we get 10 times 2.7 times 1 times 1, which just comes out to be 27.0. And what we can do is we can multiply across another way to do it, you can multiply across the bottom. 1 times 7.87. 7.87. And when we actually take 27 divided by 7.87, we end up with an answer which is 3.4307. And our units, as we said before, are going to be milliliters of iron. So here's another method. And again, all we're doing is we're doing the same steps. We're just organizing it a little differently. Here you can kind of see all of the units canceling out. Some people like this method for that reason. So this will, again, work for a lot of different chemistry and physics problems that you might find. So, and finally, choose a method that makes the most sense to you. There's a setting of a proportion. There's using a factor label. So try both. See which one makes most sense, which one you find the easiest. And I would say stick with that. So, any questions? Make sure to let me know tomorrow.